All right, well, I think it's 10 o'clock now, and so I want to welcome you to Stormwater Awareness Week, to this workshop with Amy Kronson with the State Water Resources Control Board. She is the senior lead person for the industrial and the construction general permits. And Amy, it's such a privilege having you here with us this morning.
Thank you so much, John. It's really great to be here. This is really one of my favorite events of the year, every year. So thanks for having me.
All right, great. And we are very privileged to have her join us. And really, the spirit of this workshop is really just to kind of fill us in on the latest with the construction general permit. So we want everyone to understand, and I'm going to show a disclaimer here. This presentation is really meant just as to be an informative session. It's not one of the official State Water Resource Control Board workshops. So this is just FYI for Stormwater Awareness Week participants, but I think you're going to find it to be very good information. And so we're glad that each one of you have joined us for this. So I'm going to stop my share, and Amy's actually going to talk about the construction general permit, and she's going to share her screen.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I think I am sharing, so let me know if I'm not.
Yes, you are. Looks good.
Great. Great. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for showing up to this. It's a great event every year to hold these workshops and to kind of find out what's going on in the stormwater world. So from my perspective at the State Water Resources Control Board, it's nice to, get people in on what's happening with the regulatory piece of stormwater. And so I just appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to talk today about the draft construction stormwater general permit, or the CGP, as most of you would be familiar with it. And I'll talk about timeline at the end, but just so everyone knows, this is still draft. It's not been adopted yet. So we'll discuss that a little bit more. There we go. Great. It looks like it skipped one of my slides. There we go. Okay. So just as some background, the Federal Clean Water Act prohibits certain discharges of stormwater containing pollutants to waters of the United States, except those in compliance with a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES permit. The State Water Board adopted the existing CGP back in 2009 to regulate stormwater discharges associated with construction activities disturbing 1 or more acres. The existing construction general permit did expire in 2014 and has been administratively extended until the effective date of a new adopted permit. So we've learned a lot over the last 12 years implementing the existing construction permit, and we've learned what has been working and what hasn't. So we're proposing a number of changes for the reissuance of the CGP. So some of these changes are listed here, and they are the primary topics that I'll be covering in this workshop. So we've reorganized the draft permit, hopefully for easier use. We've added passive treatment technology requirements. We've incorporated total maximum daily load implementation. We have updated some information to be in compliance with the statewide water quality control plans. We've added requirements for dewatering and demolition. And then notice of non-applicability criteria, notice of termination process, sufficiently sensitive test methods, monitoring and reporting revisions. We've also removed the bioassessment monitoring program and the rain event action plans, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail. So for the permit reorganization, for those of you who are used to the 2009 CGP, you may have noticed a difference in the draft if you've looked at it, that the organization of the permit requirements is different. Throughout the implementation cycle of the current permit, we've heard feedback that it's difficult to navigate in the permit. So we've done some reorganization in an attempt to address this. So in the order, we started off with the findings, defining which projects need coverage, applying, revising, terminating permit coverage, and then the requirements that apply to all dischargers. Attachment A is for the linear underground and overhead projects. It had a lot of the same content that the order had, so we consolidated it. We also organized attachments A, C, D, and E, which are the risk requirement attachments, so that it flows through minimum BMPs, monitoring, and then reporting. Compared to the 2009 permit, there are 4 new attachments, including passive treatment requirements, total maximum daily load implementation, ocean plan exceptions, and dewatering. These attachments are separated out so that dischargers who need to implement these requirements can jump to the attachment rather than sift through all the requirements elsewhere in the permit. Additionally, Appendix 1, which was previously an Excel spreadsheet, has been converted into a Word document because we have a mandate to make sure that everything online is accessible for those with visual impairments. And so it can now be read by a screen reader versus the Excel spreadsheet that couldn't be read in any meaningful order. The Word document does not have any calculation capabilities, unfortunately, but dischargers are able, and consultants and everyone is able to use smarts to input the information for the calculator. And then another thing I'd like to note, when using the PDFs of all of these documents, we've added capability in there to navigate digitally through the PDF. So you don't have to print the permit. You don't have to have it, in a big binder with tabs and all of that. You can navigate through it electronically, which is a benefit of this permit being 12 years old. And now we have new technology and better ways to do things. So that being said, I'd like to talk about the passive treatment technology use requirements. It's kind of a big change in the draft permit and kind of important. So treatment chemicals which cause the coagulation and flocculation of suspended solids are often used to meet the turbidity numeric action levels in the stormwater permits. We've seen this over the years. You're looking to meet that 250 NTU, and so frequently folks will use some kind of chemical treatment. The 2009 CGP only addresses treatment chemicals that are used within an active treatment system, which is an enclosed system that can be monitored for toxicity prior to discharging the effluent. Passive treatment technologies differ from active treatment as they are applied outside of an enclosed computerized system with pumps, filters, and real-time controls. Regulatory requirements for passive treatment technologies are currently implemented in the US EPA, North Carolina, and Washington's construction stormwater permits. And so we looked at those to see how we might address these issues. The passive treatment technology requirements found in attachment G of the draft permit specifically apply to products or chemicals that are applied to water, such as sedimentation basins or within a concentrated runoff stream. Stakeholders worked with State Water Board staff to develop the proposed requirements, and the intent of the proposed passive treatment technology requirements is to prevent construction stormwater discharges from creating potentially toxic conditions in waterways by specifying which chemicals can and can't be used, design and application methods, monitoring, and reporting. So we had a preliminary staff draft of the permit that went out a while ago prior to this public comment period. And that draft sought to impose requirements for passive treatment chemicals that were mixed into bonded fiber matrices, hydromulches, and spray tackifiers. But based on feedback from interested parties, staff determined that it would be appropriate to remove those requirements from attachment G. So that's a change we've made from that first draft. Passive treatment chemicals can vary in active ingredients, dose amounts, application methods, and aquatic toxicities. They can take the form of liquids, powders, socks, and blocks, among many other applications. And dischargers should be familiar with the chemicals characteristics by reviewing safety data sheets, toxicity information, and manufacturer's instructions. Additionally, commonly used cationic treatment chemicals such as positively charged polyacrylamides, can be toxic to aquatic life and can enter the environment through stormwater runoff. So these are actually prohibited in the proposed draft construction permit. On the other hand, anionic and non-ionic polyacrylamides are generally less toxic, but still have to be dosed properly to avoid adverse effects, as well as just get the best use of that chemical. So in the preliminary staff draft, we had proposed to involve the QSD heavily in the calculations to properly dose and apply passive treatment products. But in talking to stakeholders, interested parties, we decided it was too burdensome for the discharger, who often hires a knowledgeable contractor to apply these products. And so we instead want them to follow manufacturer's guidance when applying the products. So now the next big topic here is total maximum daily loads. And we'll talk a little bit about this, and in the question and answer, I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more. So, sorry, let me find my slide here. The total maximum daily loads are existing documents that have been adopted into regional water board basin plans by each regional water board. And they're plans to address Clean Water Act 303 delisted impaired water bodies. TMDLs are adopted by the regional board or the US EPA, depending. A total maximum daily load is the sum of allowable loads of a single pollutant from all contributing point sources, non-point sources, background sources, and a margin of safety. So total maximum daily loads are not self-implementing, and they must be implemented through requirements in permits or other board actions. The existing 2009 permit already includes a list of potentially applicable TMDLs, but it's outdated and does not have implementation requirements at all. The proposed draft CGP intends to update the list with existing TMDLs applicable to construction stormwater discharges. TMDLs assign waste load allocations to point sources, which is the maximum pollutant load for each point source that can be discharged to a water body. And stormwater discharges associated with construction activities regulated by this permit are generally considered point sources of pollutants and are therefore assigned waste load allocations. So there are 68 total maximum daily loads proposed for implementation in this permit, which represent a variety of pollutant categories, including indicator bacteria, chloride and salts, diazinon, nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, sediment, temperature, metals, and other pollutants that are toxic to aquatic life. Many of these pollutants are associated with sediment, which is commonly discharged, as you know, by construction projects as a result of land disturbing activities. So responsible dischargers in this context are dischargers with coverage under the construction general permit who discharge stormwater associated with construction activities and authorized non-stormwater discharges either directly or through a municipal separate storm sewer system to impaired water bodies or watersheds identified in a TMDL with a waste load allocation assigned to construction stormwater sources and have identified one or more TMDL specific pollutants in the site's construction stormwater discharge. That is the world's largest sentence, and it may not make total sense, but that's why we have a Q&A. And I'll continue to further explain this a little bit more. It's definitely the most complicated piece of this permit. So due to the variety of pollutants and waste load allocations assigned to address them, staff developed multiple implementation strategies consistent with the assumptions and requirements of the TMDL. The intent was to streamline compliance by leveraging and modifying existing permit requirements wherever we could, and existing requirements such as pollutant source assessments, source control best management practices, soil loss modeling, such as Russell 2, non-visible pollutant monitoring, and reporting are the basis for the TMDL implementation requirements in this permit. So we are proposing 4 categories of TMDL implementation requirements. The first being compliance with the general permit, where those are already sufficient to comply with the TMDL. All 4 of the categories must technically comply with general permit requirements, but that's all they have to do. The second category here is compliance with erosion and sediment controls paired with Russell 2 soil loss modeling to demonstrate compliance with mass-based waste load allocations, which are typically assigned for sediment and pollutants associated with sediment. The third one is compliance with the TMDL related numeric action levels, which are new action levels to comply with concentration-based waste load allocations assigned in the receiving water. And those action levels will act just like the turbidity and pH action levels, where if you exceed, you have to do some kind of iterative corrective action and make sure that your BMPs are working, et cetera. And then the fourth is compliance with the TMDL related numeric effluent limitation to comply with concentration-based waste load allocations assigned at the point of discharge. Both the TMDL related numeric action levels and effluent limitations are proposed for assessment through the non-visible pollutant monitoring requirements, which all dischargers are required to do when there's a breach, failure, or malfunction of a BMP or spillage of materials that can be transported by stormwater. One of the biggest changes from the May 2021 draft, which is the draft we're operating under now, is that staff has redefined what it means to exceed a TMDL related numeric action level or effluent limitation. Instead of a single sample limit, we define an exceedance as being 2 or more analytical results per pollutant per discharge location over the value that is listed in table H2 for the specific pollutant water body combination in a reporting year. This was based off similar implementation requirements in the industrial stormwater general permit, which went into effect in 2020. So it's kind of a new way to do things, and one that we felt would be appropriate. So the 68 TMDLs assign a total of 204 waste load allocations. These are all just numbers that will be important, but not so important. But 14% of these TMDLs are proposed to be addressed by complying with the general permit requirements, 8 of which intend to address bacteria by emphasizing minimum BMPs. The one unique implementation requirement is for the Los Penasquitos Lagoon sediment TMDL, which does require that dischargers submit an estimate of discharges representative flow rate on an annual basis. So for that one specifically, the TMDL itself had requirements to measure flow. 45% of the TMDLs are proposed to be addressed using erosion and sediment control paired with Russell 2 modeling, and 41% of the TMDLs are proposed to address with numeric action levels and numeric effluent limitations, 23% numeric action levels and 18% numeric effluent limits. So what does this mean and what are the steps here? So the first step to determine if these requirements are needed for you is determine whether you're a quote unquote responsible discharger. Does this project discharge into a TMDL watershed or water body? We will have a mapping tool similar to the existing tool for the industrial general permit, which is this screenshot that you're seeing on the screen. Step 2 is to perform a site-specific pollutant source assessment. Does the site have sources of the TMDL listed? Of those pollutants, is there potential for those pollutants to be present in stormwater? If not, then the TMDL implementation requirements are not applicable. And then step 3 is to refer to the proposed attachment 8 for applicable attachment H, for applicable TMDL implementation requirements to determine what requirements are applicable to that site. And I'm sure we'll have lots of comments and questions on TMDL, but this is the presentation. You can look at this for reference as well. And then I briefly, before we get into Q&A, wanted to talk about some other proposed permit changes. Since the 2009 CGP has been in effect, we have adopted statewide water quality control plans for ocean waters, as well as inland surface waters, enclosed bays, and estuaries. These water quality control plans function similarly to those adopted by the regional boards, but apply to the whole state. Likewise, the regulations, policies, and water quality standards established by the water quality control plans are implemented through other state water board orders, such as the CGP, the IGP, and other permits and orders. Additionally, the ocean plan was updated in 2019 and requires the implementation of monitoring requirements for discharges directly to ocean waters. The monitoring requirements of the construction general permit are deemed compliant with the model monitoring provisions in the ocean plan. So there's information about that in the permit. Additionally, the ocean plan prohibits the discharge of stormwater associated with construction activities to areas of special biological significance, or ASBS, unless the discharger is granted an exception. The requirements for discharges that are granted an exception are in attachment I of the draft CGP. And then again, in 2015, the State Water Board amended the ocean plan and the statewide water quality control plan for inland surface waters, enclosed bays, and estuaries, and established a statewide water quality objective for trash, a prohibition of trash discharges, and implementation requirements for stormwater dischargers. The construction stormwater general permit reissuance this draft permit proposes to implement a prohibition of trash discharges, also known as just zero trash. If a discharger cannot comply with the total prohibition of trash, there are requirements to install a full capture or equivalent device or system to prevent trash from entering the waterway. All right, so dewatering. The proposed permit defines and incorporates implementation requirements for construction dewatering activities to build upon the US EPA's 2017, and now they're going to have a 2022 construction general permit. However, dischargers subject to a separate NPDES, de minimis, or low threat discharge permit for their dewatering activities are required to obtain coverage and comply with the requirements of that separate permit rather than the CGP. So the requirements in attachment J of this draft permit are for projects with dewatering activities that are not already regulated. And I wanted to make that clear because I think there were a lot of questions about that. Dewatering discharges authorized by the proposed draft permit include mechanical pumping or siphoning of non-potable water from excavations, trenches, foundations, vaults, groundwater removal, specifically related to the construction activities, and or water collected in surface impoundments, ponds, puddles, low points, and other similar accumulation points. The discharger would be required to comply with specific dewatering discharge prohibitions, and the regional water boards may request monitoring and other BMPs associated with it. The preliminary staff draft, so the one prior to this that we released for feedback, had language that restricted what methods could be used to dewater without a justification. And so we sought to address this by focusing the requirements protecting water quality rather than a prescriptive design of the dewatering. So demolition, the proposed permit incorporates additional implementation requirements for demolition activities to reduce the runoff of legacy pollutants such as asbestos, lead paint, and PCBs or polychlorinated biphenyls. The basis of these requirements was the US EPA 2017 CGP. And something to note is that this applies to projects that require coverage under this general permit. So those that disturb 1 or more acre of land or are part of a common plan of development. If the demolition is occurring on a slab and the remainder of the project doesn't disturb soil, then that project would not necessarily need to comply with these requirements. All right. And then I wanted to talk about the notice of termination a little bit. We found that notices of termination were being submitted to the regional board, and it was taking a very long time in some cases to get approval or to get someone to look at it. And so some of the changes that we've made is that we ask in the permit for the discharger to submit project-specific information, final site map, visual inspection, photo documentation, etc., so that it'll be easier from a desktop level or a short inspection for the regional boards to approve the notice of termination. And then we've added in the automatic 30-day approval of NOTs by the water boards if they've not addressed it in any way. If they haven't gone in and said, you know, I've marked this for review, I'm going to do an inspection, or taken some other action. And then a bit of a small one here, but it does matter. We are implementing the new federally sufficiently sensitive methods test method rule. And the US EPA has finalized minor amendments to the Clean Water Act. Excuse me. And this general permit requires the use of sufficiently sensitive methods to meet the requirements of the amended Clean Water Act, and requires dischargers to ensure all laboratory analysis are sufficiently sensitive and conducted according to test procedures under 40 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 136. And that's all listed in the permit, including the observation of holding times, detection limits, and other measures designed to ensure quality assurance and quality control. Additionally, for any calculations required by the permit, a value of 0 will be assigned for all analytical results less than the minimum level as reported by the laboratory. So as long as the sufficiently sensitive method was used, as evidenced by the reported method detection limit and method minimum level, which is also referred to as the reporting limit, then measures designed to ensure quality assurance and quality control. That said, these requirements apply to samples that the discharger collects and sends to a laboratory for analysis, so not field measurements. For the most part, construction stormwater dischargers perform field sampling for pH and turbidity, where properly calibrated instruments used in field sampling will comply with the sufficiently sensitive test method rule. An example where this rule may impact dischargers is through non-visible pollutant monitoring, especially when coupled with applicable TMDL implementation requirements. And then I wanted to talk about the removal of bioassessment and the REAPs. So in the review of implementation of this permit over the past 12 years, we recognize that the bioassessment monitoring requirements were intended to align with the proposed biological integrity policy, and that policy is still under to replace the current bioassessment monitoring requirements and use risk level. My notes are a little weird here. And we'll use the fees that are already paid into the SWAMP program to do a bioassessment monitoring study. And it would be to determine if there are significant water quality, biological integrity, and watershed health impacts from large, high-risk construction projects. So that study is no longer on the dischargers. It's something we're going to do at the state board. The state board in the future could potentially decide to include bioassessment or biological integrity requirements to implement specific water quality control plans or policies through future permit reissuances. So this may not be the end of it. We may see it, but not this time. So we are not proposing additional receiver and water monitoring requirements to replace bioassessment monitoring. And the receiving water monitoring requirements for risk level 3 and LUP type 3 sites should largely be the same, save for some clarifying revisions in the draft. And then for the REAP, the existing permit included the rain event action plan requirements to provide dischargers a consistent on-site inspection checklist for site preparation prior to a precipitation event. And staff determined that the goal of the REAP should be action-based instead of a checklist or reporting-based. So the proposed permit replaces REAPs with QSD involvement over the life of the project, QSP Prestorm Inspections and visual observations, as well as implementation of site-specific corrective actions. So anticipated next steps, we had a hearing on August 4th. Public comment was due August 13th, and we're here in this fall 2021 area where we're working on the formal response to comments and a final draft of the permit. And then, excuse me, consideration of adoption by the State Water Board is to be determined at this time. We would like it to be soon, but we also want to make sure that we consider, respond to, and really, put into practice a lot of the public comments that we've received so far. And John, that is it for my presentation.
All right, well, great. Thank you, Amy. And just want to remind those that have joined us that you can ask Amy questions here. And so if you would like to do that, please use the chat function. It's at the bottom of your screen. You can press on chat and then type in a question. I see we already have a couple. And so first I want to just ask you, Amy, a little bit about the renewal process. And that last slide, you gave us some information about that. So public comment ended August 13th.
Yeah.
What type of comments did the water board receive? What stakeholders were reaching out to the water board? I know that you probably received a lot of comments, but could you give us kind of a general feel for the types of comments?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so we received approximately 76 letters, and they came from industry groups, trade associations, stormwater organizations such as CASQUA, or the California Stormwater Quality Association, from private citizens and environmental groups, among others. Each comment letter, of course, has multiple comments, so it's a lot more than 76. And currently we are cataloging those comments and working on responsive actions, whether that be a correction in the permit or clarification of intent. And the general nature of the comments are requesting clarity for the most part and expressing the commenter's analysis of things like costs and ability to implement requirements, which is really helpful information for us to get from the stakeholders. There are a lot of comments on the implementation of TMDLs, as you might anticipate, and it's a brand new, part of implementation of this permit. And so I think the majority are on TMDLs in some way or another.
Yeah. In fact, I saw something that I hadn't seen in other permits before, or renewal processes, was just the feedback we were receiving. I know I submitted a couple comments and I received actually an email back from the water board acknowledging receipt of each of those comments. So that was, I thought, really good.
Thank you. Yeah, typically if you send a comment letter to the comment letters email inbox, we get it through a roundabout sort of way. But if you included Brandon and myself directly on it, then we, hope to recognize that. And we really do appreciate the comment process. So thank you.
So are there any particular challenges that you are facing, or that you're facing because of the comments? I can think back, I think it was when this permit actually was issued, it took quite a while to actually, work through the comments, and that's why there was such a long delay. Do you see anything like that this year? Are there any challenges that you're trying to balance?
Yeah, so it's funny, you're making me a little nostalgic. One of my first jobs was as a student at the State Water Board. And so going through all those comments and creating the administrative record and all of that was one of my first jobs as a student here at the Water Board way back in 2008 and 9. So yes, John, it can be quite difficult to balance comments from all the different types of stakeholders. And we do get some comments that are in direct contradiction of each other. And so at that point, it's up to myself and staff to figure out what is really being said, how does it apply, from a policy standpoint. We have to get our lawyers involved sometimes to see what we can and can't do legally. And it can be quite challenging, but honestly, it's one of the most important aspects of the public process. And one of those that's the most rewarding. We learned so much from all of the stakeholders, interested parties, folks that are implementing these permits. And so we really take this comment period seriously. And if it does take a while, it's because we're really poring over those comments one by one and trying to come up with the best permit to address them all, even if they're in contradiction to each other.
All right. Well, speaking of feeling nostalgic, I realized I've been following this CGP issuance since the original one in 1992. Man, talk about dating myself. That's nearly 30 years. That's scary. But each time this permit's been renewed over that time period, it comes out with these new requirements. You know, the sense is this is going to protect water quality. This is going to be our ticket to meeting our objectives. And I guess I'm asking a bigger policy issue, or just kind of where are we going with this? Do you think the state's CGP this time is reaching the point where it should be adequate for addressing water quality issues? What does the Water Board hope to accomplish with this reissuance?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a tough question, because when you look at it holistically like that, over the last 30 years, right, we've done all of these things and we've created this QSD QSP program, and you know, when are we done? And really, so this is meant to be an iterative process where we're constantly learning new things and technology is being developed and continuing to evolve. And I don't necessarily see a future where the permit will, you know, remain the same cycle after cycle with no improvements or adjustments. And that's because our ability to protect water quality increases and new challenges appear, such as balancing, you know, water supply with water quality as we look to a future of more intense storms and potential flooding mixed with years of extreme drought and water supply issues. And so with this reissuance specifically, I do hope to achieve better clarity of permit language, incorporation of lessons learned over the past 12 years or 30 years, and new implementation of TMDLs to protect those impaired water bodies, as well as a permit that helps us meet water quality goals throughout the state and protect wildlife as California continues to develop and serve all residents. You know, there are a few states that are losing population, and you know, there's not as much development and not as many people, and California just isn't one of those. We have such a great state that folks want to live in and want to develop, and you know, we have a booming population here, and we want to make sure that as we develop into, you know, the state where all these, you know, millions of people want to live, that we're doing it responsibly.
Yeah. Well, one of the big features in the last renewal was this QSPQSD program. We've had over 10 years now. I think we're going on 13 years now of the QSPQSD program being in existence. Has it met the state's expectations as far as what you were hoping to accomplish with it? And how is the Water Board, you mentioned some changes coming to it, but how is the Water Board changing the roles of QSP and QSDs in this permit?
Yeah, so the QSD QSP program is definitely, it was a big change in 2009. And it has been really interesting, honestly, to watch it grow and develop over the past 12 or so years. I think this requirement did improve construction site management of stormwater, as well as erosion and sediment control, you know, just in general, really focused on that. So in this proposed draft, we've stepped up a little bit on the roles of the QSD and QSP to be more involved in the site. We've seen that there's a clear benefit to having trained and qualified individuals on the site implementing these erosion and sediment control practices. And then we continue to work with the Construction General Permit Training Team, or CGPTT, to improve on and manage the training and certification program. So we really are looking at, you know, making those iterative improvements of the program over the years, but we do recognize it as being a successful program.
Okay, good. And speaking of QSPs, they do a lot of monitoring, and since 2009, we've learned a lot about, well, how construction sites operate when it comes to water discharges and monitoring. And having to sample 3 times a day. How is this permit changing some of that, maybe adjusting it?
Yeah, so we have adjusted some of the monitoring a little bit. Namely, we have looked at the qualifying storm event, which used to be the qualifying rain event, but we recognize that there are all types of precipitation, snow and others. So the qualifying storm event is now based on precipitation intensity rather than just presence absence, at that ½ inch. So now it's a ½ inch over a 24-hour period. We've done some research. We've seen data on, the impacts of rainfall intensity on erosion versus just, a blanket amount of rainfall without a time period. So that has changed a little bit. We've changed the monitoring some to get at, the most impactful discharges from the site to water quality. And we have put in more of an emphasis on the non-visible pollutant monitoring, which is existing in the 2009 permit, but just wasn't emphasized and honestly wasn't done a lot over the years. And now to comply with TMDLs, it's through that mechanism. And so we want to make sure folks are doing that monitoring as needed. We're not here to collect data for data collection's sake. We, want that data so that we can show that you're complying with the TMDLs or other water quality objectives.
And I imagine you received a lot of comments during the comment period on just that, on how monitoring should be conducted. Okay, well, we do have some questions from our participants, so I want to field some of those to you. Mel asks here, Russell 2 modeling for sediment TMDLs is not realistic with constantly changing slope lengths. How are we supposed to meet TMDLs using Russell 2 modeling when the modeling will show soil loss numbers of pre-existing conditions cannot be met with temporary BMPs when pre-existing conditions have canopy, and it says in parentheses, soil loss number 1 ton per acre, and during construction when best are BMPs available with soil loss 10 plus 8 tons per acre. I have to echo Mel's comments. In fact, that was one of my comments, was talking about Russell 2. But Russell 2 didn't necessarily get built into this by the State Water Board, right? The regional boards issued the TMDLs.
Yeah, actually, so yeah. First of all, good comment, Mel. Thank you. I've heard this comment from Mel and from you, John, and from other folks too. And to answer your question real quick, John, the TMDLs are written at the Regional Water Board. They did not include Russell 2 modeling as a requirement in the TMDLs. This was a means of translation by State Water Board staff into the permit. And we do recognize that there are some issues with this approach. What we were really trying to get at was, a lot of these pollutants are either sediment itself or bound to sediment or associated with sediment. And so we're looking at what's the best way to do source control, sediment and erosion control. And there is this model out there that models soil loss. And so we have received lots of comments on the use of Russell 2. And I can't say, right now what the outcome will look like in the final adopted permit, but we are working with CASQA and Caltrans and others to see if there's a usable, workable way to use soil loss monitoring, or soil loss modeling rather, in this way.
Okay, great. And Mel has also a question. I'm just taking these in order. Talking about dewatering this time, how will dewatering reporting work? You're going to use smart, email, phone. If we turn off the pump overnight, are we supposed to report back when it's turned back on the next day? And what is the reason for requiring this? Will the water board not allow dewatering on some days, or is it a report only?
Great question, Mel. I'll have to look at the actual language a little bit more deeply to answer this question very specifically. But what we were getting at is that in the 2009 permit, there wasn't a lot of language about dewatering. It was always kind of confusing. What do I do? Can I do this? What region? You know, what other permits? It was very confusing. So we meant to clarify. And I think for these, you know, quick report things, if there's any requirement to notify the regional board, it would be email or phone. If it's something that needs to be certified or reported, it would be through smarts. And then if we turn off the pump overnight, are we supposed to report back? Mel, honestly, I have to check at the permit language there, but I will take this question back and make sure I check on it. And Mel and I are in contact somewhat frequently, so I'll get back to you via email.
And Rebecca, my assistant, can you copy these and actually put them into an email to Amy?
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Vern asked this question, and I know where he's coming from. He's the active treatment guy. In attachment G, passive treatment technologies, are there going to be residual chemical analysis requirements?
Currently, we do have language for residual chemical analysis for toxicity in some applications, depending on what's happening on the site. Yes.
All right, good. And it's good having Sean with us. He's asking a question here, looking for clarification in regard to pre-storm inspections for QSD or QSPs. Likely timeframes, 48 to 72 hours. That will be in the permit. Corrective actions, ID implementation, and potential non-compliance if developer does not implement actions outlined. How's that going to work? Or what do you see happening there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just rereading the question.
There was a lot in there.
Yeah. I think what you're getting at, Sean, is that when you do these, no worries, when you do these pre-storm inspections and there are corrective actions needed or implementation or potential non-compliance that you see on the site, are there going to be violations or some kind of action on the developer if they don't implement those suggestions by the QSD or QSP? And if that doesn't clarify the question, let me know. But in terms of that, so the LRP or the owner, whoever is, you know, listed as the legally responsible person in SMARTS is ultimately responsible for any violations or any notices of non-compliance, et cetera. In terms of the communication between the QSD, QSP, and that owner, we're not proposing to regulate that relationship or that communication in any way. But I do see that there is an issue when a QSD, QSP says, I have this certification, I'm signing that this is not adequate, and you need to fix this. And then the LRP just doesn't, or the developer, whoever you're working with, it can cause a conflict. And we don't have any specific language about that, but that's a really interesting one. And I'd love to hear some more thoughts on that, Sean, if you want to reach out.
All right, good. And what I noticed is, although the REAP has gone away, many of the REAP tasks are now in the pre-storm. Much of the function that the REAP was trying to accomplish is now in what's being required for pre-storms. So,
yeah.
Okay, so I have another question here, one more question, but just to reach out to everyone, we still have 10 minutes roughly. So if you have a question, now's the time to type it into the chat and we'll love to take that. But Meryl's asked the question here, how would the TMDLs be addressed in the SMARTS NOI process and the Swip documentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're currently about a year and some months into implementing this for the industrial general permit. And the way that we've done that is we've created the structure in SMARTS for folks to indicate where their site is, what watersheds or water bodies it may discharge to that require TMDL implementation. And then you select that and you upload your monitoring data should you need it. So that means that it's in your pollutant source assessment. You've had a failure, breach, malfunction, or spill of a BMP, and then you sample for those constituents. You would input your sampling results as a normal, ad hoc report, select the parameters that you're reporting, et cetera. And then that goes in your ad hoc monitoring reports. And then in terms of the Swip, it should be included in the Swip as part of, the site information and any other areas in the Swip that it might need to be included in, like lists of BMPs and what you're trying to address and so forth. And so that will all be uploaded to SMARTS as well. Additionally, we will have a mapping tool available prior to the effective date of this permit so that you can go online, type in your address, your site address, or where it may be, and find what would most likely be your TMDL implementation status. So it'll show up on the map and say, this area is covered by this TMDL, and you have to comply with the requirements in attachment H for, et cetera.
All right. Well, I don't have any other comments here. If you have a question, type it in right now. But I do have another question here on my list, and you kind of addressed this, but I would like to maybe talk about this a little bit more. Now that the public comment period has been closed, what's next? And I know maybe it's hard to put a date on there, but we're constantly, we've been sending out for the last 6 months proposals saying, here's our pricing, but the permit's about to change. And so everybody's interested in when that permit's going to change, because it's going to change a lot of things in how things get implemented and how we even bid projects. What do you see down the road? Do you see it coming out in 2021, or really are we not looking at it until 2022?
Yeah, so I don't know how this happens, but 2022 is fast approaching.
Yes.
It's just in 2 months, really. So, I can't say for sure, but not likely 2021. It would likely be early 2022. And then, as you may know, when we take a permit to the board for adoption, we can request a certain amount of time needed until the effective date. And then the board really gets to decide what that time is. But because we need to do things like update SMARTS, build this mapping tool, provide other guidance and information on how to comply, we typically will ask for a relatively long period between adoption and effective. So the effective date could be somewhere like early 2023. It just depends.
Now, is there any thought to trying to coincide it with the start of a storm season? Because it's awful hard to switch gears in the middle of a storm season, especially for monitoring programs.
Yeah, and typically we like to coincide the effective date of the permit with the reporting period, which is in the middle of summer, and not the typical rainy season for most parts of California. And so, that would factor into the decision as well.
Well, I do appreciate, though, how seriously the Water Board takes comments, and they're taking their time to really work through them. That means a lot, I'm sure, to the entire stormwater industry. Good. Well, what I want to do is I'm going to share a screen right now and give your contact information, Amy. People can reach out to you, I suppose, at any time. I know you've been very responsive to WGR. What's the best way for them to contact you if they have questions or specific questions they want to talk one-on-one with?
Yeah, definitely email is the best way. I'm still working from home, as you can see and hear my dogs, I'm sure, earlier. And so, yeah, email is the best, but I'm happy to set up a Teams phone call with anyone and talk face-to-face. Additionally, my staff, Brandon Rosenboom, is the lead on this project. He is on a well-deserved vacation right now, which is why he's not here today. But he's also very responsive, and I can actually put his email in the chat as well. But please feel free to reach out to either of us at any time. And we try to respond at least within 24 hours. If that's not possible, we'll let you know.
All right, good. And let me check. Yeah, there's chat. All right, great. All right, well, I want to first off thank you, Amy, for being a part of this hour and bringing us up to date on the permit. And we look forward to seeing it come out. And yeah, so, and thank you to all our participants. Wow, we had over 50 join us. And so we're so glad you can join us. If you think of anyone who might want to hear this presentation, it has been recorded. It will be posted within 24 hours or so at the same place where you logged in to take this class. So just that little blue video icon, if you check that in about 24 hours or so, we should have the recorded version up. And so good. And make sure you take advantage of some of the other workshops coming up. At 2 o'clock today, I have Caltrans that are going to be joining us. I'll be interviewing them. We'll be talking to Dusty Giffen about doing stormwater Caltrans style. And if you have done Caltrans projects or want to do Caltrans projects, this is a must attend workshop. They're going to really break it down. You know, Caltrans does comply with the construction general permit, but it looks a lot different if you've done Caltrans work before. They have their own kind of culture and way of doing things. And for someone new, it can be a lot to learn. So be sure to join us for that 2 o'clock session. And then if you want to see Yosemite tomorrow morning at 10:30, I'll be actually live in Yosemite with Half Dome behind me talking about meadow restoration with Yosemite National Park biologists and restoration scientists. So that might be a great workshop for you to attend. But there's many others, so hopefully you can take advantage of some of these this week. All right, well, thank you, Amy. Any last words?
No, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. And those workshops all sound amazing. So I hope folks really take advantage of that.
All right. We'll see you all at the next one.